Welcome to night number 89 of History Bedtime Stories. In our pajamas, in bed, tonight we're talking about William Lambert. Now, William Lambert was born in Trenton, New Jersey in 1817. It's unknown whether both of his parents were freemen or just one, but William is born a free man in the North. And as a young man, he's taken under the wing of a Quaker schoolmaster, a man named Abner Hunt Francis. Now, Francis was not just a schoolmaster, he was a master tailor, and he was an abolitionist, active in the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a series of safe houses and conductors being people who would help escaped enslaved people to final freedom in the North and in Canada. By 1830, Francis has moved with his young protege, William Lambert, to Buffalo, New York, because it was the center of the abolitionist world at the time. And from 1832 to 1838, Abner Francis stays in New York, working to build routes to freedom for escaped enslaved people. And during that time, Lambert, a young man, sets out on his own, knowing that he wants to make a mark on the world. He travels to the Great Lakes region, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, by working as a cabin boy on commercial steamers. And when he arrives in Detroit sometime around 1840, he settles here permanently. Once here, he gets a job at a tailor shop. Makes sense. His mentor had been a tailor. He'd been trained in garments, and he starts working and is so successful he's able to open his own tailor shop. At some point in his tailor shop in Detroit, he happens to meet the famous abolitionist George D. Baptiste. Baptiste and Lambert come together and become friends, officially co-conspirators, and abolitionists conductors on Underground Railroad through Detroit, helping people to final freedom in Canada through Windsor. He, at the same time that he's doing all of this, becomes incredibly successful as a tailor. He's able to open up additional shops, and the work just keeps coming. His education, which was considered very, very good for an African American at the time, and his contacts from growing up around the likes of Frederick Douglass, means that he's this really important person in Detroit's Black community as we're rolling into the 1840s. In 1842, he comes together with a group of influential Black Detroiters to form the Colored Vigilant Committee. It was a social organization to promote African American affairs in Michigan, whether that be business, education, social justice, or freedom from slavery. He helped fight for the rights of suffrage, the rights of African Americans to vote, and very, very recognizably doesn't just argue for the rights of African American men to vote, but argues for the rights of all disenfranchised groups, including women of any race, to be able to cast a vote freely and safely in these United States of America. He uses some of his tailor businesses as safe houses for escaped slaves, and one becomes the site of one of his most heroic deeds. As a conductor on the Underground Railroad, he would shuttle these escaped enslaved people to safety and then over into Windsor, and he finds out about this escaped slave named Robert Cromwell, who's made it to Detroit, but hot in pursuit is Cromwell's owner. It is a misconception that for escaped enslaved people who've made it to the North, they're free, nothing to worry about, happy times. That's completely untrue. As an escaped enslaved person, if you were captured in the North, you were returned because you didn't count as a person. You counted as property and you had stolen yourself. It's hard to wrap my head around the idea of stealing oneself, of liberty for a person, meaning the theft of property from another person. But this is where we are in 1842, and Robert Cromwell has escaped. He has traveled nearly 1,000 miles to get to Detroit. Freedom is just over the river in Windsor, unable to be returned, but his captor is in hot pursuit. Lambert has a genius idea. he uses his political power to get the owner arrested. With the owner and slave catcher arrested and jailed, Lambert's able to get Cromwell over to Windsor. Now, the charges were completely bogus. They didn't hold up legally, but he was jailed for 2 nights, and that's all Lambert needed to get Cromwell across the river to final freedom in Canada. That great heroic act sets the stage for 3 years later, in 1850, the congressional passing of the Fugitive Slave Act. Sadly, Lambert in his late 60s, early 70s, starts having some real mental issues. Today, we would call it dementia or mental degeneration, neurodegeneration. But at the time, they were completely concerned that Lambert was just sort of going mad. He's caught one evening having wandered out of his home to sit at the location of a former business he owned and say he was waiting for customers to do the tailoring on their suits. In 1890, he passes away by suicide, having hung himself in the family barn. It is a tragic death and a tragic suicide, but it has to be mentioned that dementia and neurodegeneration played into his choice, if you can call it a choice, to commit suicide that evening. When he dies, a whole nother part of his career really comes to light in shocking clarity. He had been such a successful business owner that upon his death, his heirs split the equivalent of $24 million by 2020 standards. When he died, he was worth about $3.5 million in 1890, making him one of the earliest and wealthiest African Americans in Detroit's history. I hope you are enjoying History Bedtime Stories. If you are, do us the biggest possible favor. Right down here, click the little share button and share the video. And right over here, click the little like video for us. And if you do, we'll enter you into a raffle and award out a whole bunch of City of Detroit vinyl stickers later on next week. Wash your hands. We'll see you tomorrow night.